Hi, my name is Phyllis D, and I am a Southern folk herbalist in Alabama and have lived here my whole life. I am associated with the Appalachian Center for Natural Health. I'm more than associated. I am the owner and director of the Appalachian Center for Natural Health. I am a teacher at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. You can find me at either place, and feel free to look for me on the internet and on websites. Also guest teach at other schools around the country, so you may run into me there. And I'm often a speaker at herbal conferences around the country. I'm the author of quite a number of magazine articles, but the one I'm most proud of is the book Southern Folk Medicine. Yay! If you haven't read it, please check it out. I was traditionally trained as a Southern Appalachian folk herbalist by my grandmother, who was a midwife and herbalist, and by my father, who was herbalist wildcrafter. I grew up wildcrafting in the woods from age 10 and started learning my plants in the woods. I am also studied with Tommy Bass, who was at that time period a renowned, nationally known herbalist from Sand Rock, Alabama, which is about an hour from my house. So I was able to spend a lot of time with him and learn his approach to Southern folk medicine. So I've been mostly always traditionally trained. However, understanding that we also do need to honor other systems. I have a master's degree from the University of Alabama in health studies, particularly nutrition and healthcare. I have studied anatomy and physiology. I was an exercise physiologist. I did sports medicine. I've just done a whole lot of stuff, all coming together in my sessions with my clients. Every single thing I've ever done has been very useful in sessions with my clients. So I'm going to get started on the 10 questions. The first question was, what was the best advice you received starting out on your herbal path? And both my grandmother and father and Tommy Bass had this approach. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so I have found this to be so, so true over the years. Don't get overly invested in the outcome of your clients. Yes, we want every client to be healthy. We want every client to be happy, but many times compliance is really low. You can make your suggestions. They might do it for a week or two, and then they kind of like slack off. It may be overwhelming for them. They may not have the motivation. They may not have the money. Whatever their reasons, compliance can often be low. So avoid getting over invested. Stand that people still have to make their choices. It is still up to the person and their choices in their healthcare approach. So I've always found that very useful advice over the years. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. The second part to that question is, what do you wish you'd learned or had done sooner? I've always been really interested in anatomy and physiology, and a lot of my work is function and structure based. I wish I had learned about the body and how it works internally a lot sooner. Yes, I tend to use herbs looking at patterns of dysfunction in the human body, because patterns of dysfunction, we might want to call them symptoms, if you will, could actually cover a number of diagnosed diseases, if you see where I'm going. But if you understand that pattern of dysfunction, then the nutritional and herbal recommendations that you make will cover a lot of different issues. So I had wished I had done a deep dive into how the body works a lot sooner. Because of my sports background and exercise physiology background, I understood how it moved and operated, but that's not the same as how does the digestive system work? What is this thing about probiotics and what do enzymes actually do? So, these things are old hat now, but back when I first started in my herbal practice, they were not, and not easy to find either. But I wish I'd done that a little bit sooner. Next question is, what are some recommendations for how clinical herbalists can build a client base? That's a really good question. There's always word of mouth. Obviously, there's social media and the internet. But I have found over the years that often people really want to have that human connection with their herbalist or their healthcare practitioner. They want to see the person, they want to be in that energy. So, one of the ways I built my client base over the years was doing free public speaking to any kind of support group that would have me. I spoke at the cardiology support group, the heart attack support group, the weight loss support group. So there's all these kind of support groups out there in the world. And true, a lot of them are online now, but it's still, now that COVID is getting past, a lot of them are back in person. But I found that going and speaking, and these were all free, I always got 3 or 4 clients from every single free class talk I did. I got clients, and these clients stayed with me over the years and began to help me build up a good base. Also, I networked with other practitioners, particularly massage therapists, uh, reflexologist, a nutritionist. And even though I did a lot of this myself, I was also a licensed massage therapist. Back in the day, you had to do a lot of different things to make money at being an herbalist, because it was not a situation where herbalism was as known as it is today. It really was like, herbal, you're using herbs. What does that mean? Even though in my area, folk medicine had never gone away. Um, my new client base, I had 2 client bases. What, 2 client bases? I had the country people I had grown up with who were mostly in poverty or in working trades, didn't have a lot of money, really couldn't afford to pay me. So that was a client base, and I still work with them. We barter. I don't get paid. That's fine. They do something for me. We work it out. And then there was the client base of people who were actually quite well educated and had expendable income, so they could afford to come see the herbalist and pay me. So I cultivated, because I had kids, single parent, mortgage. I really worked hard with the support groups, with networking within the communities they went to, they were involved in, to build the client base. So, one of my mottos is meet the client where they are and not expect them to try to meet me where I'm at. Ultimately, it should be a kind of a balance there and a good fit, but we won't know that unless I go out and meet them where they are, because how else are they going to hear about me over here? Chance sometimes. Also, I spoke a lot in churches. The churches here are all pretty much, the congregations were very open to herbalism, and I would be invited by a client who went to the church, and I would speak at the women's groups. I spoke anywhere I could, offered free classes. I connected with the health food stores in the area. You have to get out and network on a personal level. Yes, you still have to do the internet, you still have to have a website, but if you want to build a local client base, you got to get out there. That's how they're going to hear about you. They're not going to hear about you if you just stay home and go, God, I wish I had some clients. Right? No, get it, put yourself out there. It'll work out. Don't be afraid. All right, next question is, what are your thoughts about regulation of herbalists? I hope that never happens, because once herbalism is regulated, we are going to be in a situation where somebody's going to start talking about licensure. And once they start talking about licensure, um, the quality of herbalism is going to go down, because we're going to be stuck in the clinical studies mode. You can use, they will say, you can use any herb that has a clinical study. Probably, and I'm just pulling this number out of my hat, probably 99% of the herbs that we are using is based on traditional use, not clinical studies. And if there is a study on the herb, it's more than likely to be in vitro, not where they've actually used the herb on people. So I hope regulation never happens. I hope herbalism stays free to everyone into the world. I hope folk medicine never dies. And I consider myself a folk herbalist. All right, next question. What is the first plant you remember having a relationship with as a child? Where there were two plants, pretty much simultaneous. One was passion flower, because I grew up in the cotton fields, um, running around spring and fall, spring to chop and weed the cotton, fall to pick or pull the cotton bolls, and that's what my mom did for a living. My grandfather, her father, was a sharecropper. So that was what we did. We're in the cotton fields, and lo and behold, one of our snacks in the cotton field was passion flower fruit, because it just kind of grew everywhere. And so we call them maypop. So kind of like my first, let me see, recognizable plant as a little girl, like 7 or 8, running around the cotton field, was passion flower. And if it's nice and yellow, you can eat it. And it's got like a million zillion seeds in it. And each seed is inside this little membrane, which is this lovely combination on your tongue of tart plus sweet. And you just kind of suck the membrane off and spit the seed out. Not a lot of food there. Not, even for a little kid, it wasn't going to fill the tummy, but it really satisfied something inside you. And this probably was because, one thing, it was like super relaxing us in the cotton field. Oh, let's have a maypop. Let's heat this up and sit around and play in the dirt. It kind of like calmed us down too. So that was kind of like the first plant that was very recognizable to me that I interacted with. The first medicinal plant later, and that was American ginseng. And my family were primarily ginseng wildcrafters, although we did gather other herbs from the woods, depending on what the market was looking for at the time period. So it might be pink root, but there's always ginseng. And the whole family participated. Um, Dad, uncles, aunts, grandfather, great uncles. I mean, it was a family event to go out in the woods and look and hunt ginseng. So as I got older, um, I was like, I want to do this by myself, because I'd always been in a situation where it would be like a family member going, "Oh, here's a ginseng plant. Come over here and dig it." And I'd be like, "Okay." We had special ginseng hose, et cetera, et cetera. But when I got about 18 or 19, I told my dad, I really want to like do this by myself. Just go out in the woods with me. I want to make sure I'm getting the right plant. And so we went out in the woods. It was a time of late summer. The berries were not out yet, because you can always see, and the berries on the ginseng plant, you know, it's ginseng, you know, those red berries, but the berries weren't out yet because I wanted to find ginseng in every season. I wanted to be able to like go in the woods and go, oh, here's ginseng in May, April, June, July, September, whatever. And so we went out in the late summer, and my dad took me to a place called Moon Holler. Um, no roads in there. There used to be a old road down the mountain, but it was long gone. Um, its claim to fame was Moon Holler had Crybaby Holler in it, where the sound coming out of a cave sounded like babies crying. It also was the home of Buzzard's Roost, this really tall chimney rock that buzzards would sit on. So we went out into these woods and kind of making our way. And so we came to this place, and my dad said, between this tree, this creek, this rock, and me, he said, I'm seeing about 10 or more ginseng plants. You go find them, and then we'll go home. Your mom is cooking us a really good dinner. And dinner in the South is actually lunch in the North. So anyway, it was a very frustrating experience for me. Late summer, every plant was green and about the same height. And I became just very frustrated. And my dad was getting impatient. We'd been there a while. We had hiked in a ways. And he was just sitting with his back against a tree reading this Louis L'Amour Western while I was walking around feeling frustrated. So finally, I just had to get still. I had to just like take a breath, close my eyes, and think, not think. I just had to let it all go, let the frustration go, and just get calm and just like, and in that moment, I could hear all the things in the woods. I could hear the birds. I could hear the little creek moving over the rocks. I could hear little animal sounds. And when I opened my eyes, I could see the ginseng plant. I was just like, they were like surrounded in light. And so I was like, oh, here's one. Here, Daddy, here's what plant. Here's a plant. Here's a plant. Here's a plant. And he was like, yeah, let's dig one. Or not, just so this is your to commemorate, so to speak. We'll just dig one. We're going to leave the rest and then let's go eat. So I still have that root that I dug when I was that age. I still have it in my medicine bag. And occasionally I'll get a nibble off of it. So it has to be uh, probably 40 years in the ground. And then it's been, a lot of years, 40 years. So it's probably 80 years old that altogether between fresh and dry, but I still have it. It's still potent. You can still taste it. It is still has the bitterness when I put it in my mouth. So from there, I just for the next 10 years, that was my plant. I learned everything I could about American ginseng, always. It's one of my go-to plants. I learned everything. My dad knew about it. My grandmother knew about it. Tommy Bass knew about it. Um, Everything. So it is still my plant. All right, next question. What difference and or similarities do you believe herbalism has in the present day compared to 50, 100, even 200 years ago? Well, one of the differences is I don't think herbalism is used to treat acute infections today the way it was in the past, because now we have antibiotics. And there's a good reason. And I'm happy that we do, because 200 years ago, 100 years ago, the number one cause of death was infections. And herbs are anti-infective. I think they work topically as anti-infective agents better than internally. Many herbs with anti-infective properties actually have to touch the infection to kill the pathogen. So antibiotics kind of were and are life-saving for this reason. Now, there are some herbs that are actually anti-infective, because their phytochemicals actually do get in the blood and travel around. Golden seal is not one. If golden seal can't touch it, it can't really kill it. So golden seal is much more useful for um, colon disorders, right? Kidney disorders, where it's actually filtering through liver, it's actually filtering through. So it's touching it, it can kill it. Echinacea, we call a natural antibiotic, but it actually works internally by increasing the white cell count. So it's boosting the immune system. So when we think of natural antibiotics, it's like, can it touch it? Again, it makes it much more useful topically than internally, or is it affecting the immune system in some way? Now, there are a few herbs that actually get in the bloodstream due to their phytochemical content, like black walnut, which is actually one of my go-tos for any kind of infection. Pine is another one, a pretty good go-to, gets into the bloodstream. Wormwood, but these are our parasite herbs, what we consider our yeast parasite herbs traditionally, but they were also in a certain time period considered your anti-infective herbs. So I think this is a big shift. So the shift now I see with herbalism is more toward chronic illnesses. And yeah, they're very, very useful for chronic illnesses. So this is kind of like this shift in herbalism I've seen. Another shift in herbalism I've seen just from my young days as an herbalist, Tommy Bass's days as an herbalist. Almost nobody was on medications back then. If I saw a client, it was unlikely when I first started out that that person was on any kind of medication. Even the doctors were more along the philosophy of, let's give it a few weeks, let's see what happens, or let's try this drug for a few weeks and see if you settle down. It was one doctor here would go like, see if you settle down. So people were not on multiple medications, which is what I see now. My clients probably average 4 to 6 medications, and big difference. And so now it's like, if I don't know the medication off the top of my head, I'm definitely going to need to look it up to make sure that there are no herb drug interactions that are taking place. So that's a big difference in herbalism. We've kind of gone from acute to chronic, and the medications issue. And also diagnostics, conventional medicine diagnostics are much better now than they were, 100, 200 years ago, which is also helpful for us herbalists. If our client has been to the doctor, we can go, what did the doctor say? What do your tests show? And we can use that information along with our assessment of hair, tongue, nails, pulse, whatever assessment techniques you're using, to create a kind of better picture of what is happening with the client. So there is that difference. All right, next question. What's your piece of advice for running a clinical practice? Perseverance. When I first started out, it took a solid year for me to be able to say, I can pay bills off my practice. I can pay some of my bills off my practice. It took another probably 3 years after that for me to be able to say, I can pay my bills. I can pay my mortgage. I can buy my kids clothes. So altogether, that was probably 4 or 5 years after I started my practice, which perseverance is key, key, key. I see a lot of young herbalists getting very frustrated that, oh, I'm out of herb school. I'm going to open a practice. And then a year and a half later, they're not really in practice anymore. You've got to hang in there. You've got to believe, you've got to understand it's not going to be easy. If you want to get a practice going, it's like getting any other profession going. You're going to have your ups, you're going to have your downs. It's not always going to be easy. It's like massage practice. You put your shingle out, you do all of your marketing to get clients to come in, but then how long does it take to build up a steady client base that you can depend on to pay your bills with? So hang in there, persevere. All right, next, how did you become an herbalist? I became an herbalist because that was the family, profession. And I loved it. I was happy to be an herbalist. Um, it was just kind of an automatic thing. I didn't really want to be an herbalist in my early days. I did a stint in mental health center. I tried out herbal sideline things, a little medicine making, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless of what other profession that I tried, I would always come back to herbalism. And so it was just like, it was just in my soul. It was in my roots. It was in my bones. It's just what I was supposed to do. So I just kind of extended, eventually extended what had been the family practice. Word got around, and people started coming to see me because they remembered my grandmother and they had gone to see her. Or they knew my dad, and my dad had ginseng hunted on their land and had offered good advice to them. So now were coming to see me because I was his daughter. So amongst the poor folks, I'm going to call them the poor folks. um I just kind of extended my family business, but that doesn't, as I said earlier, pay your mortgage or send your kids to buy clothes for them to go to school. So I moved into kind of another area, a bigger city, and did that perseverance to kind of help become kind of like solid financially, or solid-ish financially. You just have to, hang in there. That's how I became an herbalist. I kind of like took over the family business. How about that? Okay, next question. What does the herbalism industry need most right now to evolve positively besides more herbalists? More clinical experience. That's at the top of my list. I'm seeing young herbalists kind of graduate from an herb school and then they go out and start their own herb school. They start their own practice. And I think what's missing is that clinical practitioner model of going to study, going to follow, going to shadow a mentor who is quite well versed in clinical herbalism themselves. I mean, all other professions have to do that. You have to at least spend 6 weeks to 3 months with most other healing professions, like being a nurse, 6 weeks at least, um, or 12 weeks. I've forgotten. A physician has to go through, those different stages where they're working, but they have oversight. So I see that is missing. So I'm seeing what's happening is, as an industry, we're kind of moving toward cookie cutter herbalism, where everybody is recommending the same few herbs, which they probably Googled and got off the internet, or maybe their teacher told them about them in school, but now they're like, our practice, are you actually getting oversight, mentorship, and practice? That's what I would love to see more of, and I would love to see that happen before people who are clinical herbalists right now decide to retire, and there's nobody with a ton of experience out there to help with that mentorship. So I would say to you, if you're a young herbalist, seek out an active clinical herbalist. Get some practice with guidance. Get very, very important. All right, next question. What advice do you wish you had had as an herbal student? I'm having to think about that one. Um, what advice do I wish I had had as an herbal student? I'm not sure. I'm just going to have to be honest here. I'm not sure what advice that I consider relevant, that I feel like I missed. Because it was a different atmosphere, and herbalism in my youth, in my grandparents' youth, my dad's time period, was considered a trade. This was like, you're an herbalist, you're an herbologist. We were not called herbalist, we were called herbologist. And it was a trade like plumbing or carpentry or woodwork. You were gathering things from the woods, and you were helping people's health with these. Sometimes, my grandmother occasionally was called an herb doctor, but mostly herbologist. So it was kind of like that different time period. And as any trade, you had to be an apprentice, and this was like a true apprenticeship, not like, "Ooh, I'm going to go apprentice for 2 days here." This was like, you got to apprentice for 5 years or ever how many years that person. Like when I was with Tommy, there was about 7 years that I was going there, because it took 7 years to kind of like get that information. I mean, how much does your teacher know? How much experience does your teacher have? You think you're going to get all of that in a weekend? Nope. So that, I think, is kind of like what I wish I had had, as an herbal student, was access to, um, oh, let me see how to say this, books. I had no herbal books. I was trying to think information, yeah, maybe, but books. I didn't really, I'd been practicing probably because I was a traditionally trained oral tradition herbalist with apprenticeship oversight. I'd probably been practicing 10 or so years before I was like, oh, here's an herbal book. I found it in the library by Rodell Press, kind of situation. So there is a huge quantity of information available to herbalists these days, to the average person these days. It just wasn't available in my time period. Not at all. So I really I didn't even start an herbal library until, oh, the 2000s, because it'd been all or tradition. I knew the, plants as I was taught. Um, but I wish that I had had this access earlier, that I was in an area with not a good library, no way to get information. Folks, you got to remember this was pre-internet, and if it wasn't in a book, you didn't have it. And so just having that access would have been neat at that time period. All right. Question. What is your favorite part of being an herbalist? And what's your big why that keeps you learning and growing? One of my favorite parts of being an herbalist, and there are a few here, but one of my favorite parts is the connection to the plants. That was my first experience in the outdoors was the connection to plants, of being outside, being in the presence of the plant, sitting with the plant, laying around under the plants in the cotton field, eating eating the plants. They were my toys. They were the shade. They were necessary for life. So I think having that connection with a plant is absolutely vital. And I also feel like some herbalists are not able to get that, um, because maybe they don't have access, or there's not a teacher, they don't have a good outdoor place to be. They live in a city, they're not living in the country, and all these things can happen. But try growing a patio plant. Put a little something in the windowsill. Connect to the green. I think that's very, very important on what level that might happen to be for you. Even dreaming about plants would be awesome. That is a wonderful connection right there. They just show up in your dreams, and it's wonderful. Um, that keeps me moving. I just There are so many plants out in the world to connect with, to learn about, even if I'm not in their presence, always have the ability to be in their presence. It is wonderful just to have that green connection in some way or the other. That keeps me motivated and learning. I'll never learn. Let me say that I will never not have a plant to learn about. There are too many plants to know about. And I grew up in the tradition where it's better to know every single thing you can about a plant. So all 100, 200 uses of a plant, all 30 uses of a plant, know everything you can about the plant, as opposed to internet herbalism or pharmaceutical herbalism, which is this plant does this one thing. No, a plant does many, many, many different things because it is a cauldron of phytochemicals. So that keeps me going, just to help share all the nuances of using a plant like American ginseng. It's like, oh, it's an adaptogen. Yeah, but it also has like these other 25 uses that we used it for, um, in a tradition. So yes, it's an adaptogen, but it's also an amazing digestive aid. It's a good sleep aid, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. So that keeps me going. That keeps me interested, continuing to find uses for plants, either based on tradition, um, reading, or just dreaming. So, and also I love when people feel better. I love seeing people come into their own, and I love how herbalism works on the mind, body, spirit. I love that, and I love to see people get stronger. Sometimes it's just emotionally or mentally, sometimes it's physically, sometimes it's all of it. There's nothing more gratifying or rewarding than people saying, I'm feeling a lot better. I have some energy. I mean, it's amazing, and I love it. So, everything about herbalism keeps me going, keeps me learning, keeps me active, and I'll just do it till I'm just creeping around and can't even get outside anymore. I'll still do it. I just love it. Thank you so much. That's my 10 questions. And again, my name is Phyllis D. Light, Southern Appalachian herbalist. I live in Alabama. Here's my book. You can find me at the Appalachian Center for Natural Health or the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.